Hebrews chapter 6. I don't know whether this is a lie or not. Pat told me you get 10 grand for speaking at this, so I prayed about it for about 15 seconds and said, yeah, I'll do it. So I think y'all are supposed to give $100 a piece or something to that. I'm not sure. We're going to look at Hebrews 6 and a couple of other passages in Hebrews. I saw a little cartoon in the paper been a while ago, but it illustrates something that I want to share with you this morning. Any of you read Dennis the Menace? Dennis and his little friend Joey, in the first section of this cartoon, are walking along the sidewalk and going up toward Mr. and Mrs. Wilson's house. And you see them standing at the door and knocking on the door, and you see Mrs. Wilson come to the door and invite them inside. And she has them in there at the table, and she's giving them cookies and drink, and they're eating those. And when they come out the door, they've got a cookie in their hand too. And Joey turns to Dennis and he says this. He says, "What did we do good to get cookies?" And Dennis says this. He says, "Joey, we didn't get cookies because we're good. We got cookies because Mrs. Wilson is good." And the truth is, you don't get from God because you're good. You get from God because He's good. God is good all the time. Now, the truth is that's difficult to believe. It's difficult for us to believe in a practical way that God really is good. It's easy to believe He's good morally, but it's hard to believe that He's good toward me, and that the basis for my receiving from God is His goodness. Not my goodness, but His. And so I want to talk to you just a little bit about a couple of things that are going to bless you this morning, I think. Hebrews chapter 6, and begin reading in verse 13. It says, "For when God made the promise to Abraham, since He could swear by no one greater, He swore by Himself, saying, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply you." Now, this is a quote from Genesis, and it's at least the beginning stages of the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant that God made with Abraham, where He said, I will surely bless you, and I'll surely multiply you. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, you know, I want to have a meeting with you at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'll have breakfast, and I want to talk to you about something, so to speak. And Abraham's not going to be looking forward to this meeting with God, to tell you the truth about it. At this particular point in time, Abraham doesn't know a whole lot about God. I mean, he knows who He is, but he hadn't had any, at least not many, conversations with Him at all. And he's going to begin thinking, probably, that any meeting with God's not going to turn out good for me. That Abraham essentially was a heathen living in the midst of heathen nations. He had adapted to and adopted the practices of those around him simply because there was no nation of God, him being the first person in the line of the people of God, you understand. So he comes to this meeting with trepidation, and God comes to him, and this is what God says to him. Abraham, I want to make a deal with you. I want to make a contract with you. And here's the way a contract works. That people swear, two parties in a contract, swear on someone else whose name is greater than either one, and that ratifies the contract, as you're going to see in a moment here in Hebrews 6. So God comes to Abraham and He says, Abraham, on my way over here, I want to make a deal with you, and I tried to think of somebody whose name is greater than my own, and I couldn't think anybody, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to swear on my own name. Would that be all right with you if God did that? Yeah. So He comes to Abraham, raises his right hand to swear. He doesn't do that, but you understand. And He looks at Abraham and I, and He says, Abraham, given the way you think about me most of the time, this is going to be hard for you to receive. It's going to be difficult for you to understand. But I want you to know something, that the only reason, I swear to you on my own name, that the only reason I'm coming to you today, it's not to clean your clock, it's not to mess you up, it's not to hurt you, it's not to use you. The only reason I've come to you today is to bless you and multiply you. That's why I've come. Okay, now I want you to keep that thought in your mind as we go through this. He's saying, I will surely bless you and multiply you, and thus, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise, talking about Abraham. For men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is an end of every dispute. Look in verse 17. It says, in the same way, God, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, in order that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we may have strong encouragement, we who have fled for refuge and laying hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, where Jesus is entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So here comes God to Abraham, and he says, I swear to you, the only reason I've come to you is to bless you and multiply you. So this covenant is going to bless you and multiply you. The covenant comes out of my heart, and this is my intent. Now it says in verse 17, it says, in the same way, God. Now, what do you think that means? In the same way, God? Let me translate that for you from the Greek. It means in the same way, God. That's what it means. In the same way it happened before, it's about to happen again. But he says even more. In the same way, God, even more to the heirs of the promise, God has interposed with an oath. So in the same way it happened with Abraham, it's happening again, but even more so. Your name is Phil? Okay, I'll just use Phil because he's sitting here. I don't know Phil, but I'm assuming that he really needs what I'm about to do to him. Remember this picture of God coming to Abraham. He swears to him, the only reason I've come to you is to bless you and multiply you. I've not come to hurt you. I've not come to use you. I've not come to clean your clock. I've not come to condemn you. I've come to bless you. Now that's something most of us don't expect from God when God comes to us. We don't expect Him to come to bless and multiply. We expect Him to come and clean our clocks. If we have a meeting with God, we're afraid of the meeting most of the time simply because there's something that He's going to have against me that He's going to bring up. In the same way, God, even more to the heirs of the promise, that's talking about us, comes to us. So He comes to Phil and me and you and everyone else. He comes to Phil and he says, Phil, given your background, given your understanding of who I am, this may be difficult for you to understand. Maybe even given what you've been taught or that the perspective you have of me or your understanding of who I am. Generally speaking, this is difficult for people, and I'm assuming it's difficult for you too. But I swear to you, Phil, I swear, on my own name, that the only reason I've come to you today is to bless you and multiply you. That's the only reason I've come. Now the truth is, God has come to us to bless us. His coming to us does always bless us. That's His heart. All right, let me show you the rest of this, okay? He says, in order that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we may have strong encouragement. We have fled for refuge and laying hold of the hope set before us. This hope is an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. So, God comes and says, the basis of this promise is this. There are two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, that we may have some things. These promises rest upon these two unchangeable foundational things. And I promise you it's going to do some things for you if you get this. The first thing it's going to provide for you, He says, is strong encouragement. An anchor for the soul, and a hope that leads you behind the veil. Those three things. These two unchangeable things will provide these three things for you and for me. And I believe we need these three things. Now here's the first thing that He says these two unchangeable things are going to provide for you. It's going to provide for you strong encouragement. You understand these two unchangeable things, you're going to be strongly encouraged. How many of you need a dose of that? Strong encouragement? You like encouragement, don't you? So do I. As a matter of fact, here's my observation of human beings. And I observe a lot of them, and I have for a long, long time. Most people need encouragement. You agree with that? Most people need to be strongly encouraged. Now, I don't know about you, but most of the people I run around with aren't strongly encouraged most of the time. They are strongly what? Discouraged. There's some element or measure or ministry of discouragement happening in their lives all the time. That's true of me also. So I need this strong encouragement that these two unchangeable things are going to provide for me every day of my life if I understand them. Now the second thing is this. Not only strong encouragement, He says the second thing that these two unchangeable things will provide, not only strong encouragement, but an anchor for the soul. An anchor for your soul. You understand about the trichotomy of man. We're built on the pattern that God set in heaven. The temple was built on that pattern. The tabernacle was built on that pattern. And so is the temple of the Holy Spirit. My own human nature is built on that pattern. I'm made up of three parts: body, soul, and spirit. Outer court, inner court, holy of holies. Those three things. So you understand the nature of this. Body, my physical life. Soul, my emotional life, my will, where I feel things, where I choose things, and so forth. And my spirit man, where the presence of God dwells. So this is going to provide an anchor for your soul, your mind, will, and emotions. So your emotions will be anchored. Your will will be anchored. Your choices will be anchored. I don't know about you, but it still seems to me like we need an anchor for our souls. Most people's emotions, as far as spiritual things, as far as their walk with God or their idea of relating to God, are all over the charts, they're all over the map. One day we feel good about it, the next day we feel terrible about it. Sometimes we're in the middle, but we're all over the place emotionally about how we feel about God and how we're doing with God. Would you agree with that? What affects our emotions that way more than anything? Here's what I think. We feel good about our relationship with God if we're doing well at keeping our external set of moral standards over here. If we do well over here and we think, well, you know, we're batting pretty good on not doing the bad stuff and doing the good stuff, then I feel good about my relationship with God. Matter of fact, I feel good enough, maybe I could pray and God might even want to bless me. But when I'm not doing good with my external set of moral standards or standards of conduct, then I don't feel like I'm blessable, and I'm not going to feel warm toward God, nor He toward me in my mind, so I feel bad. I feel good one day, bad one day, and in the middle one day, and my emotions are all over the charts concerning my relationship with God and how I feel spiritually. Most people are that way. So we need an anchor for our soul, meaning that there are two things that will provide an anchor for our souls where we're not all over the map so much and we're more consistent in our understanding of who God is and the nature of my relationship with Him. That doesn't leave me that way. So we need an anchor for our souls. The third thing he says, it's a hope that will lead you behind the veil. That's a picture of leading us behind the veil. Behind the veil is where the presence of God was manifested. So it's a hope that always leads us into the presence of God. It's a hope that leaves the throne of grace being a throne of grace and not a throne of law. It allows us free access into the presence of God. And I tell you guys, if I can get you consistently to go into the presence of God and connect with Him, you're going to be all right. I won't have to worry about you because everything you need and everything you desire is in the presence of God. That's where it is. Nowhere else. So if I can get you consistently to go there and feel welcome there and access to the presence of God regardless of what's happening in your life emotionally, then you're going to be okay. Now, let's look at these two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, that we might have this strong encouragement, the anchor for the soul, and the hope that leads us behind the veil. And that's what I want to share with you for the rest of the time, is these two unchangeable things. The introduction of the first one begins in chapter 7, and I'm just going to read a few verses there to set it up for you. And let me just tell you what it is. The first unchangeable thing is the high priestly ministry of Jesus, or the fact that Jesus is my high priest, and He's your high priest if you know Him. Okay? That's unchangeable. Now look in verse 22, chapter 7, it says this: "So much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant." Well, He sure has, hasn't He? Jesus is the guarantee of a better covenant. "And the former priests on the one hand existed in greater numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing. But He on the other hand, because He abides or lives forever, holds His priesthood permanently. Hence also He's able to save forever those who draw near to God through Him, since He always lives to make intercession for them." Jesus, our high priest. Now notice what it says. It says, the former priests on the one hand existed in greater numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing. So that means under the old system, the Old Testament, or the old government, the old covenant, there had to be a lot of priests. There had to be multiples of priests. Why? Why did you need more than one priest under the old covenant? He said they were prevented by what from continuing? Death. You had to have multiple priests because they died. One would come along and he'd die, and you need another one, and so forth. They were prevented by death from continuing, so you needed more than one. But it says, He, on the other hand, because He abides or lives forever, He holds His priesthood permanently. And He's never going to die. That's what makes this first thing unchangeable. Jesus is my high priest, and that's never, ever going to change. It's not going to change. Well, what does it mean that He's my high priest? Well, He's already said one thing about that. He says He ever lives to make, He abides forever, lives forever, and He lives forever to make intercession for me. So Jesus, as my high priest, is right this moment and forever will be interceding for me, praying for me, representing me before the Father, before the throne of God. Jesus is always there praying. He holds His priesthood permanently because He lives forever. When I first came to Christ a long time ago, I didn't know anything about God when I got saved, and I didn't want to know any, didn't care, didn't think about it. But in a kind of pretty dramatic way, I met the Lord, and it was easy at first, to tell you the truth. It was easy for me to receive God's grace. I had this idea about God. I really was grateful that the Lord forgave me of my sins and cleansed me, and I thought, what a good deal this is. And it was easy for me to receive His grace, receive His love, and walk in it. It really was. Here's my idea. I loved God, God loved me, and things are cool. Things are good. For the first time in my life, I feel good about God, and I think God feels good about me. But then I started going to church. And and I caught something at church that wasn't good. And I'm not blaming the church. I love the church. I've been in the church forever and don't know what I'd do without the church. Wouldn't have a job, for one thing. I'd have to work for a living. These one-day-a-week jobs are really good, guys. You need to get you one. But I started going to church, and essentially, they taught me what they knew, and I don't blame them for that. You can't teach more than you know. But essentially, the more I went, the more I understood, the less good I felt in my relationship with God. That's the truth. It seemed like every time I'd read the Bible, and I read it a lot, I was really a serious disciple, and I read the Bible through, and I prayed, and I desired to please God with all my heart and life, and people would talk to me about that, and the more I read and the more I heard, the less good I felt, because it seemed like I'm just getting farther behind. I mean, the list gets longer, and I'm getting weaker. Every time I read the Bible, there's something added to the list. I mean, it's the truth. That's the way I felt. I said, God, I'm doing the best I can, and look at all this stuff. I mean, I can't do it. It seems like every time I just nearly get over the high hurdle, somebody raises it up. Every time I get over the bar, somebody raises the bar. And I was miserable. I mean, just simply miserable. And in my quiet time, seriousness with God, kind of, a baby in the Lord, I'd say, God, if all things being equal, if heaven wasn't in the equation, I wish I hadn't done this. If heaven wasn't in the equation, I was happier before I met you than I am now. That's just the honest truth. Now, I told you I was a serious disciple, so early on I just read something and learned something and thought about something. Here's my idea of my relationship with God and what God did for me, what Jesus did for me. So I understood the tabernacle or the temple made of 3 different sections, outer court, inner court, holy of holies. Here's my idea of what Jesus did. Jesus went outside the outer court, and He saw me wandering around out there, and He just walked out there and grabbed me by the hand. In other words, He got me. I didn't get Him. I wasn't even looking for Him when He got me. And He took me by the hand, and He took me up to the brazen altar of sacrifice, the entryway into the outer court, where sacrifices are made. And He walked me right past that into the outer court, and walked me up to the brazen altar of the brazen laver where washings take place and cleansings. And He walked me right past that. And He walked me up to the entryway into the inner court. He walked me into the inner court, and there was the table of showbread and the 7 golden lampstand, and He walked me past those, and He brought me up to the altar of incense, right before the veil, into the Holy of Holies. And He took me right past the altar of incense, tore the veil in 2, took me into the presence of God before the Ark of the Covenant, the wings of the cherubim, the mercy seat, and into the presence of the Father. This is my idea. It's my idea of things. I'm not saying it's accurate. It's my idea. And He walked me into the presence of God, And he looked at the father and he said, "Father, I'd like to introduce you to my new friend, Clark Whitten." And God looked at me and said, "Welcome, son. I'm glad you're here. Now I want you to go do something great for me." And so I did. I tried. And that was my idea, the way things were. So I tried to go be good for God and do good things for God. Now, here's the fatal flaw in my understanding of this that took me years to correct and understand. Jesus did do all this. He bypassed all the externals, all the requirements of the law, took me into the presence of God, and He has introduced me to the Father. And the Father has said, "Welcome, son." But here's where I missed it. God never told me to leave His presence and do anything. He never told me that at all. God never said that. Somebody told me He said that, but He didn't say that. God never required me to move from His presence at all. His throne is a throne of grace, Hebrews 4 says, and I'm welcome there. Not only am I welcome, but I have a responsibility to live in His presence. I have access and therefore need to take access into His presence all the time. That's where I missed it. Let me tell you something, guys. Here's something that I believe if you'll think about it will change your life. Talking about Jesus being our high priest. Here's the reason I think most people don't access the presence of God more than they do. And that is where you get your needs met. It is where everything you need is provided, is in His presence. It's the truth. Sounds ethereal and all spiritual and all that, but it isn't. It's not ethereal at all. It's just the truth. In the presence of God is where your needs are met, where your life is enriched and blessed, and where you connect. Here's what keeps most people out of the presence of God more than anything else. I believe Christians are way, 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 way too conscious of their sin and too unconscious of the grace of God. Now, you don't expect a preacher to tell you that, do you? You're too conscious of your sin. Matter of fact, I was taught early and in seminary too, that as a pastor, if I can paint a black enough picture of sin to you, you'll quit doing it. If I'll holler at you about it, you might stop sinning. You might act better. But you know, I found that not to be the truth. Because when people stop sinning in any manner on the basis of being scared to death about it, the want to sin is still in their heart. They didn't get free. They may not sin. I'm glad you don't. When you don't, I'm glad if you are, quote, an alcoholic, I'm glad you don't drink anymore. But the truth is, if you're still an alcoholic in your heart, you're still fighting that war and you need to get free. You understand what I mean? Jesus died to break the power of sin, not just the act of sin, but the power of sin in your life, where it doesn't have any more power over you. See, Christians don't have to sin. We do, but we don't have to. And that's the glory of the gospel. I don't have to sin anymore. I'm not under its power. So I believe Christians are more conscious of their sin than they are of God's grace. So their whole lives are regulated by how am I doing with this sin thing. If I'm not sinning much, I feel pretty good about my relationship with God. I know there may be a few things, and I got some areas and weaknesses and so forth, but I'm taking care of all that. I'm not cussing as much, and I'm not, whatever your list is. You got a list. And we all have different lists according to what our backgrounds are. And I often tell this story to our folks, and some of our guys are here this morning, and I say to them, I said, how would you feel if you were walking downtown Orlando or somewhere and you walked by this bar and it had windows in the front and you saw Martha and me, that's my wife, Martha, for 32 years. And what if you saw Martha and me sitting in there at a table and we were having a few? Sitting there talking to each other and drinking a beer or whatever. I said, what would you think? I'll tell you what you'd think. You'd think, oh my gosh, my pastor is in there drinking beer with the heathens. I never would have. I'm telling you the truth about this. I mean, I might could have believed it about pastor, but I never would have thought Martha would do that. That's what you'd think. And your hands would start to sweat and you'd flush and you'd think, oh my gosh, what is he doing? Now, I don't do that. I don't sit in bars and drink beer. But see, that's a cultural thing for us. Not a biblical thing, it's a cultural thing. Now, go over to Germany and try that out on the German Christian. To the German Christians, it's nothing. You know what they will get on you about? Not drinking beer. Drinking coffee. You all sinned badly this morning by doing that. But our lives are regulated about how we feel we're doing with our sin thing. I'm not saying you should sin. I'm not saying you shouldn't be conscious of the fact that there's good and evil and right and wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we live in this consciousness of sin. When I'm doing well with my sin thing, I feel good about my relationship with God, but when I'm not, I don't. I feel cut off from God. And I've heard people say, when you sin, God removes fellowship from you. Not sonship, but fellowship. Show me that. Show me that. That's not in the Word. God never withdraws anything from you. And if He ever withdraws anything from you, He withdraws fully from you, and you don't have any hope. None. He's more committed to you than you are to Him. Don't you understand? Aren't you glad about that? Aren't you glad God's more committed to you than you are to Him? What is that? That's a clock. You can throw it away. First unchangeable thing. It's impossible for God to lie. He's our high priest. He's right now interceding for me. First unchangeable thing is the fact that Jesus is our high priest. It'll provide you some strong encouragement, an anchor for your soul. I'm not going to let my soul dominate me. The truth is going to dominate my thinking, not my emotion. And it'll provide an access or a hope that leads you behind the veil into the presence of God. And here's the second unchangeable thing, introduced in chapter 8. I'm going to read from chapter 10, look in verse 9. Here's the second unchangeable thing. High priestly ministry of Jesus, number one. Here's number two. It's the new covenant. The new covenant is unchangeable. Then Jesus said, behold, to the Father, behold, I've come to do thy will. Jesus said, behold, Father, I've come to do your will. We're talking about a covenant here, okay? Behold, I've come to do your will. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions about that statement that Jesus made. He's talking to God. He says, behold, I've come to do your will. First of all, did Jesus come? He said, I've come to do your will. Did Jesus come? Yes, right? He came. Well, when He came, did He do the will of God? Yes. When He came and did the will of God, did He do all of the will of God? Yes. He filled it to the full, right? Never sinned. So, He's entering into a covenant with the Father. He came to do God's will. He came to fulfill the law. He came to do the requirements that God had in the first covenant. That's what Jesus came to do. And He did it. And He did all of it. He said, I did not come to destroy the law. I came to what? Fulfill the law. I came to fulfill it. See, all covenants are conditional. There's no such thing as an unconditional covenant. I don't care what anybody's ever said to you. You're never going to find that in the Word. There's no such thing as an unconditional covenant. All covenants are conditional. Meaning, you do your part, I do my part, we got a deal. When you don't do your part, what? The deal's off. That's the nature of a covenant. I commit to you, I may do it in blood. I may do it with what do you call putting something in the bank over here to ensure that I'm going to do escrow. I may put a bunch in escrow over here and may lose it all, but that doesn't mean I have to keep it. You understand? I may go to jail, but that doesn't mean I have to keep it. So all covenants are conditional. So is the new. And Jesus fulfilled it. He said, behold, I've come to do your will. He takes away the first covenant in order to establish the second covenant. By this will, or the performance of this will, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. For every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices which can never take away sin. But he, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time onward until His enemies be made a footstool for His feet. For by one offering He has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Now, there's so much in here. By one offering, He has sanctified or perfected for all time those who are sanctified. So this says so much. It says, first of all, that you're not only justified, you're sanctified. From God's perspective, you're already sanctified. You've already been made perfect from God's perspective. That's what He said. By Jesus' offering, you've been perfected. How many of you in here feel like you're perfect? But from God's perspective, you've been sanctified. You've been perfected. From God's perspective, God sees you as sanctified or perfected. Don't you understand? That's the only way He can see you. If He didn't see you that way, you'd go to hell. God sees you as perfected. Why? Because you are. Judicially, you're perfected. Experientially, you're not. You're not living that out fully, but from God's end of things, looking back at you, you're perfected. Already, sanctified. Now, here's the nature of the new covenant. Golly, I need more time to do this. But, okay. Let me talk to you about the nature of the new covenant. This second unchangeable thing in which it is impossible for God to lie, that you might have strong encouragement, an anchor for your soul, and a hope that leads you behind the veil. Jesus right now remembers my high priest. He's praying for me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He's already presented His blood before the throne of God that's cleansed me of my sin. God has invited me into His presence as a son, and I stand there today, and that will never change. Never going to change. Jesus is never going to die. He lives forever. He lives eternally. Right now He's seated at the right hand of the Father already, and Ephesians says that I'm seated together with Him in heavenly places. I'm already there. That's already fixed. You can't change that. And I'm not going to change it. Can't change it. Won't change it. And it really makes me happy waking up early every morning knowing that Jesus is my high priest. Here's the second unchangeable thing, the new covenant. Remember, covenants are conditional. You do your part. I do my part. We swear on by someone's name greater than ours, and it's ratified and keeps our feet to the fire, so to speak, so we don't break covenant. Now here's the nature of the new. See, God came to the nation of Israel and He said, I want to make a covenant with you. And they said, okay, great. So God comes to them and He says, okay, my part in this covenant is this. You can read about it in Deuteronomy, Leviticus if you want to. He said, my part in the covenant is this. I'm going to bless you and I'm going to multiply you. I'm going to provide everything you need. Your clothes are not going to wear out. Your crops are going to do great. All your animals are going to multiply. And your shoes are going to last forever. And you're never going to get sick. You're never going to have needs or wants. If you don't believe that, read Deuteronomy. It's there. God says, I'm going to fix you from start to finish. I'm going to be your great provider, everything you need. And the nation of Israel stood there with big eyes like that and thought, that's a good deal. Right? God says, I'm going to do all this for you. That's my part. Now your part is I want you to keep the law in all points. All of you keep all the points of the law. That's all you got to do. And the nation of Israel enters into this covenant agreement with God with the asinine thought that they could do it. All the old covenant is about this, folks. It's God chasing them coming to God, God pursuing, and this whole tumultuous relationship based upon that covenant keeping and God's forgiveness and bringing them back. And then, it's what it's all about. It's all a picture of us, too. Okay. So God comes to us in the new. And He comes to you and me and all of us and He says, hey, guys, I want to make a new covenant with you based upon better promises. And we say, great, we need it, right? Do we ever? Okay, guys, in this new covenant, my part, what I'm going to do for you is essentially what I promised I was going to do in the old. I'm going to bless you and multiply you. Spiritually, this is true. I mean, everything in it's true in a spiritual manner. It really is. And in many cases in the physical manner too. I'm going to bless you and multiply you. If you have faith and trust in me, I'm going to meet your needs. Meet every need you got. You're going to have some needs, and I've designed you to have needs, but I've also designed you that where those needs are met are me in my presence. So I'm going to bless you and I'm going to multiply you. I'm going to prosper you in what your hands touch. I'm going to make the world jealous because of my blessings upon you. If you get sick, I'll heal you. If you have needs, I'll provide. Essentially, everything I promised in the old, I'm promising you in the new. So that's my part. My part is this. Now your part, conditional covenant, now your part is, I'll tell you what, guys, you didn't do very good with your part in the old. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise the stakes a little bit on my end. I'm going to make some better promises to you than the old. I'm going to do my part. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do your part too. Don't you understand, guys? The new covenant isn't a covenant between us and God. It's a covenant between God and His dear Son. Jesus came to do the will of the Father. And He did it. He kept the requirements of the law for me. Now, if God does His part, God does my part, what part do I have? I don't really have a part except to do two things: to believe it and receive it. I'm telling you, it's the greatest gift a human being could ever have. And it's unchangeable. There's never a need for a new covenant, a newer covenant. Jesus fulfilled this one. And the Father and the Son ratified the covenant in blood. And I get to participate. Now let me ask you a question. When you hear about those two unchangeable things that Jesus is committed to pray for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and represent you before the throne of God, and allow you access into the love of the Father and the sonship with God, and the fact that He's kept the law for you, and He has a covenant with His Father for you, and He died for you, and all of that. When you hear about things like that, does that make you want to run out and sin all over town? Does it? I mean, does it make you want to run out and lascivious all over Orlando? Lascivious, is it? Wicked sounding word, isn't it? No. And if it does, you're not getting it. See, people think that if you preach grace to people, they'll start acting like heathens again. But genuine Christians, it doesn't. What it does is capture your heart. And you say, oh God, how can I sin against such great love? And when I do, I'm sorry for the right things instead of the wrong things. Because my sin is against Him and His love and His friendship and His fellowship. Two unchangeable things, the new covenant and the high priestly ministry of Jesus, in which you might have strong encouragement, an anchor for your soul, and a hope that will always lead you behind the veil into the presence of God, where everything that you need is available and accessible freely. Let me pray for you. And Father, I pray that You'll bless these guys today, and that they'll remember there's two things that will never change, in which my life is anchored. And it's not how I feel. It's the truth of Jesus and what He's done. Now, Lord, we come expressing our love to You and our eternal gratitude for Your sacrifice for us. Lord, I thank You that You see me as sanctified, as having been made perfect and holy. So I reckon that's what's happened to me. Lord, I don't see myself that way, but I sure am glad You see me that way. And I pray, Lord, that these guys walk from here this morning, they'll be welling up within inside them an exhilarating joy at being a son of God. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.